Sorry,
you were earlier talking about like the long-term issue, because I guess the idea now is to get rid of Hamas so they don't have to spend the next 10 years funding the Iron Dome interceptions and all that. But the problem is that only works if you have a good plan to ensure security after Hamas are gone.
Sure.
Because if you just get rid of Hamas and then leave, then you're just going to deal with the fact that you've just cemented the radicalization of every family in Gaza, and then then they're just going to become a threat later. Or you occupy, in which case that's really expensive and it has security issues, because then your soldiers are wandering around a place where you've just killed 20, 30, 40,000 civilians.
I feel like you have to treat, I think the whole population of Gaza is radicalized, assuming that like all the, like you saw that video of that 10-year-old girl talking about how the Israelis are cowards. You've got like the crazy fucking TV shows and shit that everybody's watching and everything. Like, I think that population is already fucking, they're beyond radicalized at this point.
The only way you get a ceasefire with Hamas still there is if they're just is if they can just secure the boundaries of Gaza to a point that Hamas can never do what they're doing again, and then you would just have to very, very quickly revive a peace negotiation between the PA and Israel to basically win like the hearts and minds and basically show that negotiation will always achieve more than what Hamas can do. So yeah, one of those options anyway.
Gotcha. Okay, I feel like I'm basically in agreement with that. In terms of like absent a ceasefire, what do you think that Israel should do?
Who's taking this one first? I think they have every right to go in and try to get rid of as much Hamas stuff as they want, but like it's so embedded in the civilian population. You know what? Actually, I think Israel has to do targeted strikes and then fuck off. I don't think Israel can completely dismantle Hamas, because I think the civilian cost is going to be so high that I think Israel's going to lose standing with the rest of the world. And I think eventually they're going to lose, if it hasn't already happened, they're going to start to lose US support, which I think would look really bad for them.
Interesting. So do you not support an invasion at all, just exclusively strikes?
I mean, maybe some small scale thing, but like if this ends with like 40,000 plus civilian deaths, like that's wild, right? This would be the largest, right? I think this would be the largest loss of life within the borders of Israel from any conflict ever. It might already be, I think, right? How many like Israelis died, or how many people within the Israeli borders died in the 6-Day War and the Yom Kippur War? I don't think it was at this 10,000 plus number, or 11 or 12,000 if you're including Israelis. Like, it's already, the cost of life is very, very, very high. So it can't be. You can't have a scenario where you're killing over 40,000 people, even if 50% of them are militants or whatever. It just can't be that. It's too much, I think.
I think more Palestinians have died now already than died in the entire 48 war. No, or it's very close.
Possibly,
it'll definitely become more. Yeah,
possibly. I don't know.
Because I think it was about 10,000. People are saying Lebanese war killed 20,000. Yeah, that's it's a lot.
Yeah, I guess my concern is that like if you're thinking about like how many people are going to die in the next 2 years, I think I probably agree with both of you that the targeted strikes thing that Destiny you're proposing there is going to have fewer number of people die over the next 2 years. But I'm not sure that's going to be the lower number over the period of the next 10 years, if that makes sense.
I don't think it matters.
Like,
I think you have to, your short-term goals of maintaining good standing with the international community, or as good as you can, or at the very least with the United States, is crucial. And the United States probably has, I don't know how much this is factoring into Biden or the State Department's thoughts, but like the moral authority that the United States has when conducting foreign wars is going to be really important for potential upcoming conflicts. It's going to be important for the resolution of Ukraine-Russia, which we might be on the eve of. It's going to be important for issues related to Taiwan in the future. So the idea of the United States standing by Israel as 20, 30, 40, 50,000 civilians are killed, I don't think that's a politically tenable position for the United States to have.
So when you say that you support targeted strikes, you're saying that America should support targeted strikes. You're not saying that Israel should do it.
No, Israel has multiple conflicting interests at this point in time. What Israel wants to do is Israel wants to invade the Gaza Strip. They want to kill every fucking Hamas operative. They want to destroy and confiscate all the weapons and wipe out all the tunnels, right? I think that would be the best military objective for Israel. But that military objective, as collateral damage, is going to incur such a huge loss of mostly civilian life that their international position will become untenable, and the support that they'll lose in the international community is going to make their security situation in the future worse, right? So they have to balance out what does the world think about us and what are our military objectives. These things have to be balanced out.
but the alternative is that, I mean, like right now, it's what is it, $60,000 a pop every time that the Iron Dome puts down a rocket fire, and the rockets cost like whatever it is, $800, right? So like they just don't have the ability long term to
They're
wage
fine.
the war.
We give them $3 billion a year. They got the money for
They
it. They're
don't.
okay.
No,
They
but $3 billion, like you do the math, $3 billion is not enough if you're talking about Hamas increasingly getting a bunch of money from. I mean, they've already gotten a bunch of money, but they're going to get even more from Iran, and increasingly that's going to.
$3 billion in rockets at 80,000 a pop is 37,500 Iron Dome interceptions. I think Israel will be okay. They got it. Israel is not facing an existential threat right now, I don't think.
I don't think that's fair if you're talking about it in the long term. Like the long term is that if you're waging a war that you know is more costly from the Israeli perspective than it is from the Hamas perspective, and you know that there's a reason to believe that Hamas is going to be getting billions of dollars in the future, that's not something that you can expect unless you're willing to long-term solution have literally orders of magnitude more funding on the Israeli side. So unless you're saying that America should that Israel should be comfortable in expecting America to be providing that kind of aid in the tens of if not hundreds of billions of dollars on an annualized basis.
I understand what you're saying,
difficult.
but Israel can do things. They already have to undermine the Palestinian peace process by just cutting them out of the equation and just negotiating with every other country. We've already seen that with Egypt. We saw that with Jordan. We saw that with the Abraham Accords. Israel can just start making peace or trying to make negotiations. Like my guess, I don't know 100% the relationship between Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but like if Saudi Arabia and Israel pen out an actual peace agreement, I feel like Qatar's got to be somewhere in those conversations as well. In which case, like the funding to Palestinians is slowly going to be choked off from everybody but like Iran. I think that Israel has.
But Iran's really big. Like the long-term problem here is that there's a broader Sunni-Shia divide that's increasingly becoming a Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and increasingly Israel is starting to be seen as being on the Saudi side of that. And if that ends up meaning that Hamas is on the Shia / even though they aren't themselves Shia, on the Shia / Iranian side of that. That's a really big problem.
I don't know if the Shia Sunni shit matters when it comes to hating Israel. I feel like everybody kind of puts their differences aside for that, right? Because like the most money going into them is coming from fucking Qatar right now, isn't it? Aren't they the ones that like send like all the $1.8 billion or whatever?
Yeah, but not militarily.
Sure, maybe.
Right.
But
like it is relevant. The military component of Hamas is, I mean, it's not fully separate. There's obviously.
I mean, money is money, right? I imagine if you're smuggling weapons or buy shit, right? If you're getting money from somebody, you have.
I think that's right, but there's the component, like the undergirding reason I would argue that October 7th happened in the first place has a lot to do with Iran being concerned about their position against Saudi Arabia, and they were concerned about Saudi Arabia being on the trajectory towards peace with Israel, and that would be something that not a peace, but like an actual like understanding and recognition of one another. That would be something. That would be a threat to Iranian security long term.
I'm not aware of that if that's the case, but go ahead. Sorry.
You were earlier talking about like the long-term issue, because I guess the idea now is to get rid of Hamas so they don't have to spend the next 10 years funding the Iron Dome interceptions and all that. But the problem is that only works if you have a good plan to ensure security after Hamas are gone. Sure. Because if you just get rid of Hamas and then leave, then you're just going to deal with the fact that you've just cemented the radicalization of every family in Gaza, and then then they're just going to become a threat later. Or you occupy, in which case that's really expensive and it has security issues, because then your soldiers are wandering around a place where you've just killed 20, 30, 40,000 civilians.
I feel like you have to treat, I think the whole population of Gaza is radicalized, assuming that like all the, like you saw that video of that 10-year-old girl talking about how the Israelis are cowards. You've got like the crazy fucking TV shows and shit that everybody's watching and everything. Like, I think that population is already fucking, they're beyond radicalized at this point.
I mean, polling data does suggest that it's a little bit more nuanced than that, because people in Gaza also have had internet access and they can see perspectives like they're beyond just what Hamas gives them. I think if you looked at the polling before October 7th, it looked like Hamas were actually very unpopular, and there was some suggestion that people wanted the ceasefire to stay in, that quite a lot of people actually wanted the PA to come back as well. So it's a bit more complex than just
although I will say you got to be careful on the people mistake the Hamas is unpopular with Palestinians don't want armed resistance. The polling data on that particular question, if I remember it, wasn't like what is the popularity of Hamas. I think the question was, do you feel like Hamas is doing a good job at providing for the people of the Gaza Strip? And on that, I think they polled pretty unpopular. It was like what, like 20 or 30%, or it might have even been less than that. But I don't think that necessarily translated to, oh, they want peace because they don't support Hamas. It was just like they felt same way like in Israel, like Netanyahu, I think, is losing a bit of support. But it's not because people want like a two-state peace solution immediately. It's because they felt like he fucked up hard in defending the country in October 7th.
Yeah, the problem with that is that I think it's just over half think armed resistance across Gaza and the West Bank. They want armed resistance, but that's also like armed resistance can mean Hamas decapitating like families and setting them on fire, or it can mean like militant groups in the West Bank providing like protections against settler violence. Like, so armed resistance is very broadly interpreted. And
wait, is it? Because I thought, again,
or...
I'm trying to remember the polls that I read. I thought that question specifically, if you want to bring it up also, so I thought that question specifically was like, even if you'd negotiated a peaceful solution, do you think that you should still engage in armed resistance until like a one-state solution becomes the thing? Like arms, I think it's specific. It might specifically say armed resistance against civilians or armed resistance against Israelis. But I thought that question was quite a bit more pointed than just like, we have security forces protecting us from settlers. But I think the question specifically asked armed resistance to effect a one-state solution. But you can look at it. I might be wrong on that, but I thought that's what I remember from that.
I don't think I've seen that in PSR, but maybe somewhere else. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, I think that part of the problem is that, like, I mean, a lot of this conversation is about like Israeli security, and that's valid and obviously one of the more important things. There's a specific security of the hostages, obviously, and frankly, I think a lot of them, if not all of them, are going to not literally all of them, but the overwhelming majority of them, I think, are likely on track to die, unfortunately. But I think that the broader problem of, like, you know, Hamas is a dictatorship. The PA is also a dictatorship, obviously, a lot better of a dictatorship. But it's I struggle to figure out whether or not, you know, if I were a Palestinian and I had a choice between living in Area C or under Hamas control over Gaza, I don't think that would be a difficult conversation for me. It would be very obvious that I'd rather be in Area C, even though there are a lot of problems with Area C. And so it's like, it's difficult because the international community has this sort of sense that, like, oh, it's bad to have an occupation, but it's not actually worse for the Palestinians. And if it's also not actually worse for Israelis, I don't quite understand why that's the view of the international community. But I agree that it is.
What do you not understand here?
I don't understand. Like, it seems that Area C, though bad, is better for Israelis to have Gaza under Area C sort of type of situation. That would be better for Israelis. And it seems also that if I were a Palestinian, I'd much rather be a Palestinian under Area C than under Hamas, at least particularly currently under Hamas. And so from that vantage point, I'm not quite sure who it's serving to have this idea of let's just continue status quo of, you know, doing these targeted strikes, but not doing anything beyond that.
Wait, what? I don't know. I don't understand what you're arguing for. Are you arguing for like an indefinite occupation of the West Bank, or are you arguing for a transference of citizens from Gaza to?
Yeah.
You're arguing for a transfer?
No, not a transfer. I'm arguing for Gaza to be treated approximately like Area C and have it be separated from West Bank as it is currently, but have it be under occupation, which I don't like, but I think that is a better solution than the targeted strikes that you're proposing.
I feel like going back to occupation, Palestinians are going to see it as a step back. So I don't know how the Palestinians would be okay with that. I don't know if LonerBox.
Well, I think the only way you make that work again is if you very, very quickly after that show that there can be like a path out of it again that is not like Hamas. Yeah, I don't know. That's the thing, is like there's not really any long-term plan when it comes to what they're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, my perfect solution, if I could like just decide and do everything exactly I wanted, I would want to see an occupation, and then as soon as there's an occupation, I'd want to see an election that was run through, ideally through the UN, if they're willing to be involved. Obviously, the UN is very complicated and does not have perfectly clean hands from either side of the issue. But like, I'd like to see an election on both the West Bank side and also the Gaza side to try to move towards an Area B type solution within Area C of the West Bank, and simultaneously within Gaza, with an understanding that Hamas would probably be locked out of those elections. But yeah.
What if they elect like more radical terrorist leaders?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible, but I think that it's. I mean, that's why it would be Area B. It would not be Area C. They wouldn't have military control. But I think that, like, you know, having this dictatorship is not a long-term solution, and having like some semblance of democracy, at least over civil matters, even if it's a democracy that ends up having, you know, bad positions that I don't necessarily agree with as like a liberal or whatever. like that's going to be better for long-term security and long-term peace. Just have that trajectory shown, if that makes sense. And it would certainly be better as an average Palestinian, and particularly in Gaza.
I mean, again, if you could get Gaza under an Area B situation where, again, there's like a negotiating party on the other side, that sounds, it's just, I just don't think what's happening right now is going to lead you into that situation. I mean, is there going to be any mandate in Israel for that? Like,
I think that there's going to be a large mandate to have there be an occupation, and there already is a large mandate for that. And I think that like trying to figure out a way of having a, more progressive version of what that looks like, a closer to a trajectory towards long-term peace version of that, and particularly if that's able to be coupled with the Area C components of the West Bank, I think it's going to be a lot better than the trajectory. The alternatives are either the targeted strikes things that Stephen's talking about, which again I think is going to be incredibly bloody, and I don't see that ending anytime soon. And I also see that as being something that strengthens Hamas's claim that they're able to like get away with stuff with very little pushback, and it's going to grow their movement as a thing that is respected within Palestinian circles, and that's a problem. And it's going to increase the strength of Iran and blah 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 blah. So I don't like that solution, and I think this is the best one that's not just simply an Area C type occupation.
As far as I know, Netanyahu has no intention to occupy. At least he said that like 2 days ago. But he wants a credible force to demilitarize and to rebuild the enclave. I don't know who's going to take up that
option. I just don't believe that. Like, I don't believe that you can take out Hamas. Like, we tried to take out the United States tried to take out the Taliban out of Afghanistan. They were not nearly. They didn't have nearly the same network of tunnels, and they were significantly weaker than is Hamas, and we were significantly stronger than is Israel. So the idea that they're going to be able to simply,
I'm sorry, my reading might be really ahistorical. The Taliban was significantly weaker than.
That's not true. I don't think.
Hamas. Yeah, not only was the Taliban established as almost like the government basically of Afghanistan, they had like decades and decades of fighting experience, plus like a lot of direct support, I thought, from the ISI and Pakistan, and so many like real life tunnels to hide, and not like dipshit like, or not like horrible built dig under tunnels.
Well,
and
fucking
they had so much more
mountains
area
and
to
shit,
occupy.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they
I feel like,
but I feel like there's 300 plus miles of tunnels within Gaza controlled by Hamas.
Yeah, but there's only so much you can do with it. There's only so much you can do with tunnels versus like rural Afghanistan, right?
No, I agree.
Even Hezbollah, that's a small country, but Hezbollah were like much stronger than Hamas as well. Yeah,
I'm not saying that Hamas is better able to defend itself against Israel than is the Taliban able to defend itself, as in defend its territory against the United States. I'm saying that the capacity to like destroy, like finish the Taliban, I think would have been comparatively easier than the capacity to finish Hamas, if that makes sense, because they have so many places to hide, and it's so difficult to take them out permanently. Okay,
that's a take.
Yeah, and so therefore, if we buy that, whether or not it's literally harder than Taliban is less important, but if we buy that it's very difficult to take them out as a whole, the only version of events is that there's this optical victory of managing to go in there guns blazing and like do a bunch of strikes and take out a bunch of people, and then what? As soon as that's over, like Hamas just takes back over, and then we're exactly back to status quo, and that's not a great solution. So if you're trying to figure out a way to get like actual progress in a 10, 15, 20 year terms, you have to do something that's not just continue towards the direction of exactly where we were on October 6th again.
Well, I think the only other way is that if they go back to status quo, then they would have to focus on the West Bank and just try and show that there's another way there, and that hopefully Gazans would like see what's happening in the West Bank and then fall and like lose faith in Hamas's approach. But again, that's like that does feel like back to business as usual. But compared to what the damage is going to be caused by what you would the human price you'll need to pay to get rid of Hamas, I feel like I'm maybe more sold on the former one. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, it just strikes me that like the if you go with that the current status quo, that status quo is going to be seen as an optical victory by Hamas and by supporters of Hamas. And I don't know how we get around that without there being a change to status quo, number one, and I also don't know how we stop the exact same kind of tactics from happening again without a change to the status quo. Like, one of the things that I think is really a concern is that we just end up having this exact same event happen again in 10 years, and then the exact same thing is forced to happen twice.
I think that the big issue that you're running into, though, is that's what both sides want right now. The Palestinians want the violence to continue because they want to fight somehow for a one state, I guess, is like the goal, the dream. And I think Israel wants the violence to continue because then they have like, they feel like they've got moral authority to continue expanding into the West Bank, to continue the indefinite blockade of Gaza, and to just maintain their basically their stranglehold on all that territory. So I think both sides right now are motivated to continue, with Israel slowly benefiting, I think, more and more from the status quo. So that's why I don't see Israel moving on this. I think it has to be the Palestinians, because Israel is probably okay with the status quo because they're just strengthening their hold on all the territory. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, but so then why are, I mean, if you believe that the status quo is benefiting Israel and that the status quo is harming Palestinians comparatively, then why is it that supporters of Palestine tend to be the ones who are saying that we should just stick with this same status quo, that there should be these targeted strikes, but otherwise we shouldn't do anything?
Well, because they don't want status quo. They want the invasion to stop, and then they want to have a change of Israeli policy that's more diplomatic and more like progressive towards Palestinians. Right. That's what they want. Right?
It just strikes me that the question of what is the pro-Palestinian vantage point in respect to the West Bank is a different question than in respect to Gaza. And in respect to Gaza, if we grant that the status quo is slowly building a case for the pro-Israeli side and is slowly harming, not even slowly, but very, very on a day-to-day basis, harming the people of Palestine and the people specifically of Gaza, then like, why are we accepting that status quo?
Because everybody's retarded.
I guess so.
Well, so then stop being retarded, right? Like, this is dumb. Like, we should.
Well, I'm not. But again, you're doing like because you're assuming that the status quo is only between Israel and Gaza, right? It's like, but it wouldn't be. It would have to be that Israel's policy and with regards to the West Bank would have to change. So it's not really status quo.
But like, why?
What do you mean, why?
If you're talking about, like, if there's one version of events that in Gaza is going to be closer towards a trajectory towards something better happening, which I think that trying to build towards an area B does get there. It certainly would be better from a water security and food security perspective. Like, if you're talking about it from that vantage point, that's better, right? That is an improvement. I'm not saying it's like perfect by any stretch, but if it's an improvement, it's an improvement, and that should be the thing.
Okay. And assuming it's like fucking post World War II, where they just raise the place, get rid of Hamas, get rid of the leadership, and then it's reoccupied by some capable force, and then it's just like Marshall planned into oblivion, and then you actually have like a fairly like reasonably like a decent civil society afterwards. But the problem with that is that you're only got a guarantee on one step, which is that Israel takes out like 50,000 civilians in the process of destroying Hamas. And then after that, there's no guarantee of anything else. Because I don't know who the fuck is going to be willing to occupy Gaza and rebuild after this is all done. I think no one's going to want anything to do with the place, and they're just going to leave, and you'll just get Hamas too afterwards. That's why I'm not really signing off on what you're saying.
But so then that's the frustration. Like, my frustration there is that, like, in order to get to, if you believe that like point C, or no, I shouldn't say C because that sounds like area C, point 3 of getting to a point where it's under Israeli control, but it is also getting that benefit. It's also getting that international aid. If that's the goal that you think is better than where we're at currently, then you have to support the occupation, the horrible, horrible thing that's going to entail in point 1 to get to point 3. But the problem is that we're lacking the political will, and I think this is particularly an American perspective. We're lacking the political will to support the point 1, and without supporting point 1, you can't get to that point 3. If that makes sense.
I haven't. Have you seen any indication of like the UN or anyone outside of Israel? Because Israel clearly doesn't want to occupy Gaza again. At least that's what we're hearing from them. So. Have the UN said like we're ready to take over and rebuild once Hamas are gone, or?
No, they haven't. But this is my frustration is that, like, if no one is saying it and the US is also not willing to say it, like, we're in a trajectory where we're going to get back to exactly where we were prior to this thing, other than, a bunch of many tens of thousands of people are going to die most likely. Other than that, the result of this entire endeavor is that we're going to go back to exactly where we were on the 6th.
Yeah, the problem is if point B is like basically not going to happen, then point A is pointless.
Yeah, it just strikes me that like, if we're like, yeah, it strikes me that there's a comfort with where we're at in a way that I think is really bad. Like, we need to recognize that where we're at is untenable, and that a continuation of where we're at for the next 15 years is not something that we can accept. And this is a moment where we can get 2.3 over the period of the next 6 years. And to get there, we have to be willing to take this first step of 0.1, which is the occupation.
Again, I'll just say it for a third time now. I think I'm not comfortable with going back to where we're at. I think if we go back to status quo, then it's going to have to be the seismic policy shift, at least in the West Bank. It might be. I think if we had been if we'd been pre-October 7th, it's probably okay to say that maybe there is like not that much that can be done with regards to Gaza right now, apart from just make sure that they can't crack through the border. And one way to do that, I guess, would be stop stretching the IDF so thin with these new settlement projects. But that's hindsight.
Yeah. Part of the problem that I think that's just sort of undergirding all of this is that everything is being seen through a propagandistic lens by Hamas and by its supporters. And so if you imagine a change in policy within Area C of the West Bank that happened in the next even 10 years, let alone in the next 3, it would be seen as a victory not for the PA, but rather for Hamas, given that it's in the aftermath of this awful attack.
If it was done unilaterally, definitely. If it was done with a negotiating partner in the West Bank that was not like Hamas at all, or was like condemning of Hamas, then probably not. And if Gazans didn't get anything of what was getting achieved in the West Bank, they'd probably get more frustrated with Hamas. That's my guess. Yeah. That's probably why a lot of Gazans before October 7th were actually amicable to the idea of the PA coming back. Sorry, I'm not going to take too much of Dustin's time, but yeah.
You're good. Just listening.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. It strikes me that whatever the solution is going to be, if we're going to move forward in any sense, it has to be a recognition of PA as the future and Hamas as being reprehensible. Mm-hmm. And to get there, you can't just be making changes in reference to the West Bank and not in reference to Gaza, particularly if those changes in the West Bank are happening. And like I agree with.
Okay, wait. Okay, this is my question. This is my issue. Okay, here's what I think. Okay, the only way that peace happens, in my opinion, is if both sides agree to a two-state solution. Okay, do we agree with that, or do we think a one-state right of return?
I would say 3. I think that Gaza should be
2 or 3, whatever. We'll say, but I'll abbreviate it to 2-state. Right, that's the problem. Number 1. Okay, but the issue with that is right now, Israel doesn't really want a two-state solution because 1, they feel like they're going to get attacked from these territories anyway, and 2, because the status quo is kind of sort of favoring them. They've got good military control over both things. They're slowly expanding settlements into the West Bank. They've got the Gaza Strip on total lockdown. Like, for the most part, the status quo is more or less favoring Israel. So Israel doesn't have an appetite for super coming to the table for good faith two-state solution talks. Number 1. Number 2, on the Palestinian side, they don't want 2 states. They want 1 state. Because 2 states, they probably feel like they're not going to get a good deal. Their entire population has been radicalized like a motherfucker, and they seem to enjoy the fighting. They want to fight. So Israel doesn't have the appetite for it. They're not close enough to it because they're benefiting from the status quo. Palestinians don't have an appetite for it because all they know is basically fucking fighting against Israel. It seems to be that's like 95% of what the Palestinian struggle is. And then in the broader sense of the world, the Arab states also seem to encourage this sort of fighting against Israel as well. So they don't have as much of an appetite for it, save for the states that are slowly starting to make peace agreements with Israel, but they're not the really big important ones yet, like Qatar or Iran or Lebanon. So right now, it seems like there's no reasonable discussion that can take place until these 3 facts are reconciled. That Israel doesn't want it, Palestine doesn't want it, and the Arab states don't want it. And until somebody here is willing to move first, it's not going to be Israel. I wouldn't expect them to.
But that's my point. I think that that first mover has to be America, that America has to be both behind the scenes and publicly.
The only way America can be the first mover is if America is bringing they can't bring. I don't think America can exert any authority on Palestine. I don't think Palestinians give a fuck, right?
What America could do is America could say that we will pay we will give a shit ton of money, and it won't come directly through us, but rather go directly through the UN, and we can give a shit ton of money to try to rebuild Gaza after.
I mean, we could do that, but like I said, I'm pretty sure Palestine is already. I should look this up. I'm pretty sure Palestine is one of the most foreign funds rich
but
territory in the world in terms of the money they receive from other people, right?
That's true.
If the U.S. is going to exert influence on anybody, it probably has to be on fucking Iran, which is probably not going to happen. On Lebanon, probably not going to happen. I don't really know much about the Lebanese government or what the fuck they do. I'm going to be honest. And maybe Qatar, but I don't know the U.S. relationships with Qatar as much as Saudi Arabia. I don't know what that's like as well. So yeah. I feel like the most reasonable path to peace that nobody wants to talk about and nobody will talk about. I feel like and it sucks to say it, but I think the most reasonable path to peace is Palestinians need to say, we're done with the rockets. We're done with the fighting. We're going to chill and we're going to focus on our education, our economy, our communities. And then in 5 years, if that shit has come down substantially, I think the Palestinian argument for Israel coming to the table to negotiate a two-state solution becomes a lot more tenable. And I think international pressure will mount hardcore. Imagine if there were 4, 5, or 6, as horrible as it is, imagine if there were 3, 4, 5, 6 events where IDF soldiers were killing Palestinians or whatever, and there was no reprisal from Palestinians. And imagine you've got Gaza and the West Bank more or less peaceful. You've still got these fucking settlers moving in. You've still got some IDF violence. I think at that point, international pressure gets so big that Israel has to negotiate some kind of fair solution. But I feel like the only reasonable starting party is basically the Palestinians. And absent that, I don't see anybody else moving unless you see another path towards it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I just don't think that's going to happen under Hamas leadership. And so if it's not going to happen under Hamas leadership, there needs to be you need to figure out a way to make it so that it's not under Hamas leadership.
Then it's not going to happen. Then the status quo continues until all the Palestinians are either killed, kicked out, or whatever. That's it. Yeah.
Like your levers of power, to the degree that you have any, but to the degree that America writ large that you would be included in, the lever of power that America has is over Israel a lot more intensely than it is over the PA or particularly over Hamas. And so therefore, if we're talking about what the levers that Israel can be made to pull through.
Yeah, but we're not going to do anything to force. What are we going to force Israel to do?
That's what I'm saying. We can force them to occupy Gaza, but then we can also make sure that we guarantee that a shit ton of money goes there.
Why do we think the occupation of Gaza would be a good thing?
Because you were saying that there was a bunch of money that goes to Gaza, and that's true. But it's also true that the leadership of Hamas is worth $11 billion and living in Qatar. It's true that there's a massive problem of siphoning off those funds into bullshit and into military funding against Israel, right? So if we're talking about how we can actually move forward from a perspective of how we benefit the people of Gaza, there has to be that recognition that it's not going to happen until Hamas is no longer in
I just don't
control.
see the occupation of Gaza just seems like such a huge step back for the Palestinians, for Israel, and for the international community. How do you think that's ever going to?
Yeah, because if we recognize that the people of the West Bank under Area C are served better than the people living in Gaza under the dictatorship of Hamas, that requires that we say, okay, it's better for the Palestinians, and we also are willing to say, okay, it's better from an Israeli perspective.
I understand what you're saying, but this is you're coming from the most robotic utilitarian analysis in the world.
No, but Stephen,
hold on. What you're saying is listen, Palestinians, it's going to be better for you if we come back to your lands, if we reoccupy you, if we run this, we can do it better than you retards can. We'll do it. You lost the right. I understand what you're saying. I think what you're saying is true, by the way. I think that Israel occupying Gaza and running the security checkpoints and everything, I think it actually would be better for Palestinians, but it is totally politically untenable. There's no possible way they would go for it. I don't think it would.
That's why America needs to support it.
No, when I say they won't go for it, I mean nobody in the international community would go for it. I don't think America would pressure them for it. America would look crazy. America pressures Israel to reoccupy Gaza after 18 years of disengagement. There's no way.
I think that
there
needs to be a recognition that it is is it difficult for America to support something like that? Yes. Is it significantly more difficult for anyone who is actually a country there or in leadership in the Middle East to support it? Yes, it is significantly harder for them to do it. So if we're going to see a way of getting this broader problem to be solved in a way that it approximates 2/3 state solution, that's going to require someone to do this brave political step. And this brave political step can't come from Israel alone, and it can't come from, you can't expect it to come from Hamas, because it's not going to come from Hamas, because Hamas would fucking die and get destroyed by the Islamic State or whatever, by some other terrorist group, if they try to do it themselves.
Okay, I hear your point.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just reading something. I think but I guess it's also, there's also maybe a problem with the idea that because again, I'm guessing when you're saying that Palestinians can just like do nothing violent for the next 5 years and then that might advance things, I guess you're saying that with the knowledge that it's like never going to happen, right?
It's not going to happen.
So
I'm saying that if of all the possible paths to peace, and historically, when we look at paths to peace, whether we're talking about civil rights struggles in the United States, whether we're talking about like even the ANC, I think in South Africa, although they did commit violent acts, I think they generally try to commit to nonviolence, right? Like when you look at these other things historically, the smaller people fighting ultra violently against the bigger people, has this ever worked anywhere? Any historical examples where like, oh shit, they kept doing the terror attacks and it finally worked and they got peace? Like, has that ever happened anywhere?
Just to maybe qualify a little bit what you're saying is like, it's not so much like non-violence, but I guess if you're going to do like an ANC style approach, it would have to just be that violent impulse will always be there. It just needs to be channeled into something that can actually be productive. So like whether it's like I'm perfectly in favor of people just like if a settler wants to set up a new caravan, then they can just like blow it up, preferably when the guy's not in the house. Like that kind of shit's probably like the Mandela-esque leader. But even with that, I think I've read an article about this from Foreign Affairs quite a while ago, but I do know that the United States does have the ability to pressure Abbas and the PA in some directions. And I think one of the big problems with Abbas right now is that he's not very interested in a successor. But there are lots of leaders within Fatah who probably would have a much more like modern or like a reasonable approach. It's just that Abbas is so authoritarian that he's not really got any incentive to try and allow leadership conferences or like any kind of competition to take place within the party. So, but that the United States could pressure that. They could pressure Abbas to like start to explore potential avenues for new leadership, at least in the West Bank, outside of Hamas.
It just strikes me that like, I mean, it's almost, I don't know, like it strikes me that like when we're talking about, oh, the first step has to come from Abbas or has to come from Hamas, even worse, like that's not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen. And so making that first step come from the United States is the thing that we have more closer to a lever of power over and closer to a level of an ability to actually see done. And we have an ability to pressure Biden in a way that we don't have an ability to pressure, Hamas or Fatah. And it strikes me as a little bit like unhelpful to be saying that it has to come from Hamas and that they have to grow up rather than us recognizing that they're not going to and figuring out a way to move towards a trajectory towards peace.
Okay.
But anyway, yeah. All right, I have to bounce. I have to go. But it was lovely to talk to you. Have a good one.
Well, be careful.
I felt a bit weird.
I'm gonna have a conversation.
2v1s are weird, but okay.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's okay. I need to bash more super Zionist people because everybody thinks I hate Palestinians, which is only half true. So.
Oh no.